name is Anthony Yurich. I'm doing a presentation today on American gender and racial inequalities, and it's essentially an analysis of the individual versus society. I am presenting to my family. So first off, we're going to start off Lincoln's address at the Republican State Convention in 1858, and how he uses the Dred Scott decision, and how it also relates to modern times. We're also going to segue into Sojourner Truth's speech at the Women's Rights Convention in 1851, and how it relates to modern day inequality for women, and then we're going to do an overall analysis of it all together. Alright, so Lincoln's address to the at the Republican State Convention in 1858, he surrounded it by the biblical quote, Matthew 12:25, which was, "A house divided itself cannot stand." However, it was not used in the way to say that the entire union will fall, just that it would either go one way or the other, either anti-slavery or pro-slavery. So he introduced using a bunch of examples and then eventually led to the Dred Scott example, and he used it as a scare tactic to threaten the sovereignty of the Republicans. Because at the time the Republicans were anti-slavery, Democrats were pro-slavery. So the Dred Scott case was used as an example of how he believes pro-slavery politicians are going to eventually take over and the nation will go towards being slaves. Okay, so Dred Scott, he was a slave under an army surgeon. He was born in the United States. He lived in a slave state, moved to a free state where he made a family. He had 2 or 3 children. Then he went back and moved to the same slave state. However, being abused by his master, he argued that since he did move to a free state and he was living there for an extended amount of time, that he was considered a citizen, and it was illegal what his master was doing to him, the abuse to his family and his children. So it was eventually ruled 7-2 in favor of Sanford, because Justice Taney said that under U.S. Constitution, a free Negro whose ancestors were from Africa or were slaves are not technically citizens. And it was also eventually ruled that the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which allowed some states to enter the Union as free rather than being completely slaves, was considered unconstitutional since slaves were property at the time. And this relates to modern times because Dred Scott was an example of the individual versus society, because the entire case was surrounded by the stigma of popular opinion versus what is right, because it is widely believed that Dred Scott was a free man. However, he was tried as a slave and was thus treated as a slave and as property. So an example of that today would be Colin Kaepernick. He's using his rights as a peaceful protest, something that is under the Constitution, and it is widely popular that what he's doing is wrong. So it is yet again another example of popular opinion versus what is right. And here we have a montage of essentially what he's doing, why he's doing it, and how it relates today and how we can learn from it.
What was your initial response when you saw that Colin Kaepernick sat for the national anthem?
I'll be completely honest, my initial response was anger, you know? I was angry and disappointed because I grew up a Niner fan and I was pulling for this guy. Now he just pissed on my flag. But then I just stopped making all these judgments and tried to listen to what he's talking about.
Specifically, is police brutality.
And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I want to try to understand where he's coming from, at least somewhat, because I haven't walked around in his shoes, but he hasn't walked around in my boots, you know what I mean? So I just wrote a letter and he got a hold of it.
He contacted you?
Yeah, he contacted me. He said he was inspired by it and he was wanting to sit down with me, you know, just have a discussion. First thing he said when we met was, "Hey, I just want you to know I appreciate your service more than anything." I expressed to him, maybe there's a different way to demonstrate where you're showing more respect for those that lay down their lives for what that flag and anthem stands for. I suggested, kneeling, because people kneel to pray. We'll kneel in front of a fallen brother's grave, to show respect. He said, I think that would be really powerful.
Colin Kaepernick choosing not to sit on the bench this time, but to take a knee.
The fact that he was willing to listen and go to a knee versus sitting, I thought was huge. That's an important step that he's taken. I think other people need to take a step too and maybe listen to him.
Cops are getting paid leave for killing people and not being held accountable. That's not right.
I respect those men and women in uniform, but the ones that aren't doing it the right way, we need to correct it. We need to fix it. He's right about that.
People of color have been targeted by police.
It is an issue, and we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go.
I think as a service member, it's more upsetting for me to come back from fighting for my country overseas to see how divided we are and how angry we are at each other.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners say, "Get that son of a bitch off the field"?
I'm more hurt by that than somebody sitting down during the anthem.
At this point, I'm just like, Mr. President, let's be presidential now and reach across to people that you don't agree with and you think are wrong and just say, you know what, let me hear you out.
If we have these real conversations that are uncomfortable for a lot of people, it's something that can unify this country.
And maybe we can come to some kind of agreement, solution, and understand that we're really not that different. We probably want the same things at the end of the day.
Hallelujah.
Okay, so Colin Kaepernick and his teammate Eric Reese started the campaign, I guess you could call it, in 2016 during the preseason. However, Eric Reed did do a recent article with the New York Times in 2017 about how he is, quote unquote, "We came to the conclusion that we should kneel because it is respectful, rather than sit. The next day, It has always been my understanding that the brave men and women who fought and died for our country did so to ensure that we could live in a fair and free society, which includes the right to speak out and protest." So, once again, I do think the route is essentially the same, individual versus society, and it's an argument of popular opinion versus what is right. And it depicts on which side you decide to take. Next, we have Sojourner Truth. She is a women's rights activist. She argues for, the rights of women in the mid-19th century. So she was born a slave and she was mother of 5 children. Her 5 children got sold into slavery. However, 2 years later, without the ability to read or write, she did sue for the return of one of her children. She was a very religious woman, and she claimed to have the gospel speak to her and say how she needed to fight for the rights of women, especially black women at the time, as they were arguably the most oppressed. And she went on to do claims such as, "I can do as much work as any man, and if women have a pint, a quart, why can't she have her pint full?" So this page is essentially the full quote. "If a woman have a pint and a man a quart, why can't she have her little pint full? Need not be afraid to give us our rights for fear we will take too much, for we cannot take more than our pint will hold." So I interpret this as not so much she was fighting to be equal to equal, as her previous statements would actually suggest, such as, "I can lift as much as any man, I can cut corn as much as any man," but rather I interpret it as she decided that it would be best to fight for the freedom for the potential of equality. Because she's giving the man the quart, but she wants her pint. A pint is obviously smaller than a quart, so she just wants to be able to live out as a woman her full potential of equality, rather than consistently being treated as subliminal to every aspect. In modern times, women are arguably oppressed through wage, career potential, and sports, all of which can be argued for and or against. However, I believe the most suggestive one is equality at home and the personal life rather than the career, as statistics I will show you later on may suggest. However, here is a video of Emma Watson, a British actor, famous British actor, and a feminist. She's giving a speech at a meeting, and I think she really gives out a good point to suggest about it, and she takes a good...
The more I've spoken about feminism, the more I have realized that fighting for women's rights has too often become synonymous with man-hating. If there is one thing I know for certain, it is that this has to stop. I started questioning gender-based assumptions a long time ago. When I was 8, I was confused at being called bossy because I wanted to direct the plays that we would put on for our parents, but the boys were not. When at 14, I started to be sexualized by certain elements of the media. When at 15, my girlfriends started dropping out of their beloved sports teams because they didn't want to appear muscly. When at 18, my male friends were unable to express their feelings. I decided that I was a feminist, and this seemed uncomplicated to me. my recent research has shown me that feminism has become an unpopular word. Women are choosing not to identify as feminist. Why has the word become such an uncomfortable one? I am from Britain, and I think it is right that I am paid the same as my male counterparts. I think it is right that I should be able to make decisions about my own body. I think it is right that women be involved on my behalf in the policies and the decisions that will affect my life. The more I've spoken about feminism,
So I thought Emma Watson did a really good take on that because she made a lot of very, very great points. It is very easy to argue towards that women are overshadowed in the workplace and they are overshadowed over the control of their body and everything that she had mentioned. However, here I know you won't be able to see the graph as well, but between Dred Scott and the individual as like an African American and as a woman, you can argue that they are oppressed because in 2010, the Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study concerning about the race or the amount of employed per occupation for white, black, Latino, and other. You can see that as white men in, let's say, management professional related jobs, men only carried 34.8% of the jobs, whereas women have 34.8, whereas women only have 41.5% of jobs. However, you can also see from the amount of median weekly earnings, men almost outwage women by almost $200, even though women do hold a higher substantial amount of jobs in that career field. The same goes for each other, whereas the black man obviously overshadowed by Asians and whites and even white women. Now, inequality, it's very easy to argue for, but there are also some loopholes, just as any other theory. Like, for instance, do statistics really show inequality, or does it just show a basis on the lowest compared to the high? One thing that I interpreted from this was that never has there ever been a one-to-one direct correlational study done on, for instance, I look in the mirror right now. I'm the exact same person, however, I have a double and he is black. Never has there been a study of a black man and white man, the same exact person, getting a wage difference. They have never been able to prove it, they've never done a study for it. So it's easy to argue that inequality is a myth, even though statistics are on the side for it is a fact. Right here we have just some U.S. demographics. General population of the U.S. is 321.1 million, or 323.1 million, I'm sorry, with whites taking up 61.3%, and since I am using the African American population, I'm only going to mention them as being 13.3%, 4% under the Latino population. And women outnumber men 50.8%, whereas men have 59.2% of the population. Now, even though the percentages are pretty close, women outnumber men by almost 9 million. This is also business ownership in the college education. Even though women far outnumber men in terms of degrees by almost on average 1.5–2%, men outnumber women by 5% in the ownership of business. So essentially all this presentation did was I really wanted to point out the Dred Scott decision and how it showed a discrepancy between the inequalities of an African man and a white man, and sojourn truth inequalities of a woman and a man, and how it correlated together into modern time society. Whereas the graphs depicted, even though statistics prove that men and women and African Americans are oppressed against, it may not be entirely accurate because of the population difference and the educational levels that are not equally studied.